Well, hello everyone. Eric Hörst. I'm back in my home base here after a trip to Europe, and I'm happy to be back with Training Café here on a Monday. I did one from Germany a few weeks ago on a Tuesday, so it was kind of a little curveball to viewers there. This episode of Training Café, I don't have any specific topic in mind. It's going to be just your questions answered and me rambling on a little bit about certain things. But first, let's begin where we always begin. Coffee. Climbers around the world unite. Let's commune over coffee and sip together. I got some fresh Java here, getting me ready for my afternoon work. Not work out, but work. After traveling for a couple of weeks, I got a pile of work here to catch up on. And I was tempted to not have a training cafe today because of my time constraints. But I thought, heck no, this is something I enjoy. And I know there's a lot of people out there I hear from, not all of them type in questions. They just are kind of passive viewers that then email me after the fact and let me know that they enjoy what I'm doing here and they enjoy kind of hanging out and listening to us all talk training. I do most of the talking, but you help ignite the conversation. And really this episode, that's your job. So type in a question. If you have a brief training question, if you can keep it to a sentence or two, that would be ideal. It makes it a little more web friendly. And, training, nutrition, climbing performance, injury. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been climbing for 45 years. I've been coaching and researching and really involved in a very intense way for the past 30 years. So there's few people out there that have the knowledge base that I have. And yes, I am still learning. I don't know it all. And I'm not shy about admitting that if there's a topic or a question I can't answer or trying to refer you to somebody who can, I'm quick on doing that. And something else, if you listen to my podcast, especially, which I've been doing for years, I'm not afraid to say I've changed my mind on a topic. If there's something that I've become aware of or, some new research or maybe through a conversation with another coach or a veteran climber, I've been convinced that maybe something I talked about in the past isn't quite right. I'm not shy about correcting that. And I think any coach or expert that you listen to, you want to see in them the willingness to continue to learn and to admit maybe that they got something wrong and they've changed their mind on something. I think that's a important quality. And so if you are getting your coaching advice from somebody who's a know-it-all and just says it's my way or the highway, do this or don't do anything, then that's probably not the right coach or the right person to work with. And so let's move on here. In this training cafe, we're going to answer some questions. I see a couple are typed in already. I know I've had some people interested in my Germany trip and didn't quite play out as I had hoped. We had timed it to hopefully align with some of the best weather of the year in the Frankenjura, which is a limestone climbing area in the forest, the rolling forested hills of Bavaria in southeastern Germany. And unfortunately, we ended up with a springtime weather pattern with lots of rain. I think it rained half of the days we were there. And the problem with these forested areas, there's so much moisture in the ground and in the trees that even when the rain ends, it doesn't instantly dry out. There are some exposed buttresses of rock that dry out more quickly, and there's some overhanging sections that don't get rained on, but they still get moist and condensed. And so it wasn't optimal conditions. The rock there is very slippery. It's almost, the holds are almost like a porcelain coffee cup. In places, either because just they're naturally slippery or the holds have been polished if they're popular routes. And so any moisture at all makes it, you have to put so much extra force into the rock. And that's actually a conversation that I probably want to go off a little tangent here, just because I think it's quite interesting. And my son and I, who I was climbing with, I was kind of explaining to him that The more slippery a hold is, to stick on it and maintain your grip, you have to put more and more force into it. So it's not like all 20 millimeter edges are the same. A 20 millimeter edge on coarse granite, let's say, or gritstone, sandstone that has a kind of a 100 grit sandpaper feel to it, is completely different from a 20 millimeter edge of slippery limestone, or a 2-finger pocket where you just have the tips of 2 fingers. Your surface area might only be 1 square centimeter on each tip in a 2-finger pocket. Well, if that's a 2-finger pocket at the Red River Gorge, which is very coarse rock, it doesn't take as much force to cling on to that and hold it and pull on it and advance on it as it does on a slippery limestone pocket, where there's much less friction. You need to drive more force into the rock to stick the hold. And so conditions actually matter a lot more on limestone than on that more coarse sandstone or granite. At the Red River Gorge, I've climbed on days where it's darn near 100% humidity, horrible conditions, but the rock is so coarse that you can stick to it and climb at a pretty high level. But on limestone, that's not the case. And so having a day where the humidity is below 50%, the lower the better, is a big difference maker, especially when you're climbing on really small limestone holds. And so, again, conditions are more critical on slippery rock than on coarse rock for that reason. And so the dampness was not conducive to climbing really hard. I sent a couple of routes in the 7C plus range, which for me is pretty hard, but I had hoped to climb an 8A route or two, which I did project, but the conditions weren't right. I just couldn't really hold on. If I would have been stronger, I probably could have held on in those conditions, but I wasn't strong enough. And so that's the story. And kind of the same thing for my son. He climbed quite a few 14s, more AP plus 8C kind of routes. He did a handful of those, but to climb 9A or 9A plus, at his limit wasn't likely to happen in those conditions either. Okay, so enough rambling on. Let's get to some of these questions here. And I saw the first one is an injury-related question relating to annular pulley tears. In your fingers, the pulleys, there's the A2 pulley at the bottom of the finger, and then up here is the A4 pulley, and they direct the finger flexors, the tendons that run from the muscles in your forearms up and attach to the 2 distal bones in your finger. Those flexor tendons apply the force, but it's the annular pulleys that hold the tendon close to the bone, kind of like the brake cables on a bike being held against the pipe of the bike as they run from your hand grips to the tires. That's kind of what the annular pulleys are, as they help keep the tendon close to the bone. So these pulley injuries aren't the actual flexor tendon. That's a quite rare injury to injure a flexor tendon, but the pulleys are exceedingly common injuries. And the A2 pulley, far more common. Crimpers really get those A2 pulley injuries. The A4 pulley injuries seem to be presenting more in climbers that are pulling pockets, though I don't know that that's a definitive finding or not. But in any case, the question is there a difference in recovery time between A4 and A2 pulleys? And I would say not likely, though it depends on any of these pulley injuries, how severe it is. Most of the pulley injuries that climbers get are just partial tears, where the pulley that holds the flexor tendon close to the bone has partially torn but hasn't completely ruptured. And so it really depends on how much of that pulley has been disrupted, how much collagen has been damaged and degraded. that needs to heal up. And so just a small partial tear, perhaps a few weeks to a month, and it will heal up and you'll be back almost to full force climbing. Whereas a complete rupture is several months typically with a proper rehab. And so I mean, the A2 pulleys do take on more force, like when you're crimping, but and consequently, I think they're more often injured, as I mentioned, but I don't know that one heals faster than the other. And by the way, really the cutting edge now in getting these things to heal is to incorporate a pulley splint into your recovery. There are one or two versions out there in Europe and in the United States. These pulleys are lesser known. I would say most non-climbing doctors probably aren't even aware of them, but these pulley splints, they are fit to your finger. You wear them kind of like you would wear a cast. If you had broken a bone, the pulley splint is on the finger 24/7 for the first week or two immediately after the acute injury. And then you wear the splint after that, just during your rehab and during your loading. And what it does is it helps hold the flexor tendon close to the bone so that the pulley can heal more easily and also with less laxity. If you climbers who climb through these A2 pulley injuries or climb through their rehab and they're loading the tendon without the support of the pulley splint, the A2 pulley can actually heal itself in a more lax position. And so that ultimately the flexor tendon, even after it's healed completely, the flexor tendon is not as close to the bone as it was before the injury. And so the goal of the pulley splint is to hold it in place, to kind of deload the pulley to allow the initial healing to take place and get it to heal more closer to the bone, more anatomically correct, the way God made it before injury, and to help expedite the process. And there are now a growing number of cases, pro climbers that I know Alex Megos and Jessica Pills, and here in the United States, Matt Foltz, who had a recent pulley injury, they used pulley splints and were able to make comebacks from pretty significant tears in 2 to 3 months. Jessica Pills tore hers at the World Cup in Salt Lake City in late May, and she competed at basically 100% in Tokyo in the beginning of August. So 2.5 months, and she was back. And Alex tore a pulley in his pinky a few years ago and came back and did bibliography a few months later. And and Matt is in the final stages of healing through his injury, and I trust he'll be back crushing this winter season. So if you have anything more than a mild pulley, incident, anything more than that, you want to look into one of these pulley splints. And I'm going to do a video on that for my website, trainingforclimbing.com, sometime in the coming weeks to help share that information and give a little bit more on rehab protocols. And yes, using supercharged collagen, of course, can expedite the healing process as well, because this product is the most dense in collagen-specific amino acids, glycine and proline, that there is on the planet. There is no other food as dense in those two amino acids, and they comprise 2/3 of the collagen in your tendons and ligaments. Are just those two amino acids, glycine and proline. So you want to have a lot of that in your diet to help strengthen connective tissues, and especially when you're rehabbing. Okay, on we go. Let's see here. Chad from Texas, about to start my climbing journey. Glad I found you and your channel. Hey, that is awesome that you just discovered climbing. It's a potentially life-changing endeavor, as you will discover, and as many people listening here have discovered. It's good for the mind, the body. It's a heck of a lot of fun. You can do it with your significant other or your kids someday. and travel the world doing it. And so you might start indoors in the climbing gym, but I encourage all climbers to give outdoor climbing a shot, because that's where the magic happens, at least in my opinion. I enjoy training indoors, but I really enjoy traveling and climbing outdoors. That is for sure. Simon says, hey, Eric, I really appreciate these chats. Help to keep me motivated, especially as we head into the bleak winter in the UK. And yes, I hear that, because the northeastern US might as well be the UK, because it rains as much as it snows, and it's a pretty grim time. But thank goodness for climbing gyms, because we can stay strong and actually potentially make gains during the winter season. Or if you're able, travel to a lower latitude and get some winter season climbing in, which maybe I'm going to do. Try to get out to Vegas for a little bit this winter if possible. We shall see on that one. Question here. I'm currently on a year-long climbing trip in South Africa. Would you suggest I just keep climbing or do some other training additionally? Yeah, do some other training additionally if you can fit it into your schedule and if you have the tools to do it. At the very least, what I would recommend is if you have a couple of elastic bands and maybe a portable hangboard, just having that along on your year-long trip to do a really good warm-up, external rotation, Ys and Is and Ts. You can do all types of band type stretches. If you have a sling trainer that you can take along with you and hang it up over a doorway or from a tree branch or from other object, doing some sling trainer kind of antagonist training. When you're on the road for a year, you're doing all this pulling, all this climbing, and the antagonist muscles really can fall behind. You can lose balance. It can open the door to injury. And so to do a little bit of that antagonist training a couple of days a week while you're on the road is a good place to start. Now, if there's the opportunity once a month, twice a month, to stop at a climbing gym, if that is available, or even somebody's home wall, if that is available, if you could put in like a hangboard workout, do a little bit of campusing, do a little max bouldering, that could be beneficial too, because if you're on the road, now I'm making the assumption that you're on the road doing a lot of route climbing. And if that's the case, you maintain or build endurance nicely when you're on a long route climbing road trip, but you lose maximum strength. I was in Germany for 3 to 4 weeks climbing routes for the most part. And yeah, they were kind of bouldery routes, but still I came back and tested myself and I lost quite a bit of grip strength. And so I'm doing a little mini training block here for a week or two to try to recapture some of my peak strength and power for the rest of my autumn season. And so getting into the gym or doing 1 or 2 hangboard, campusing, bouldering workouts could be really helpful. Now, if I'm wrong on my assumption that you're route climbing, if you're on a bouldering trip for a year, then forget pretty much everything I said. You're going to maintain your strength and power. You could still do the antagonist training, but there wouldn't be much value in going to the climbing gym and bouldering when you've been on the road bouldering outside. So hopefully I hit something right there for you on that question. Okay, next up here is NBKA8RS. Not sure if that can be sounded out or not, but he says, if you put your thumb on a hold rather than over your index finger in a full crimp, is it structured the same as a full crimp and just as dangerous, or is it safer to do that? Well, it really depends on the hold. There's not anything dangerous inherently about the thumb lock over your index finger. It's just that when you do that thumb lock, it makes for more acute angles on your finger. You get a tighter closed crimp, a true closed crimp when you have your thumb locked on. Then if you crimp without the thumb, your fingers naturally are less flexed. The angles are less acute on the joints, and the forces are a little less on the annular pulleys. So putting your thumb onto the rock and having more of a half crimp, I guess in theory would be a little safer, because again the fingers are not quite as acutely flexed, and Sorry about that. And hopefully your thumb is contributing. I mean, ideally, if you can crimp and get a thumb like on a catch or on a pinch, that is the best, because then you turn that crimp also into a bit of a pinch. And, that's even more bomber in many cases on limestone, for instance. I spent a lot of time in Germany on the limestone grabbing these gnarly pockets, but you find a thumb and all of a sudden the gnarly pocket feels pretty good because it's like a crimp pinch or a pocket pinch. But as a practice, if you're training, you don't want to train with a thumb lock. And the reason is it just makes that really tight closed crimp that is more stressful on the fingers. So you do want to use your thumb as much as you can. It saves you some finger force. And, strengthening your thumb can be really beneficial for pinchy type holds. That's for sure. Okay, Pete says hi from Ohio. My neighbor there in Ohio. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. So that's cool. Lots of climbers in Ohio, mostly Red River Gorge climbers. So maybe I'll see you, Pete, at the Red one of these days. Hamza has a question on injury. Thoughts on cryotherapy and the Huntingjulis reaction from injury recovery. And I don't know what that is. I'll have to Google that after we're done here. You've got me kind of curious what the Huntingjulis reaction is. In terms of cryotherapy, that using cold as a therapy, this would include ice, obviously, would be the most common form of cryotherapy. Like when you ice an injured finger or a bruise or an injured joint, twisted ankle, taking ice bath, as some athletes do. American football players commonly do ice baths after a hard practice or a game. And then there's these tanks they dip you into with liquid nitrogen or whatnot that cools your body briefly for a minute, a short period of time, to a quite low temperature. And I think in the case of acute injuries, ice is a proven useful tool. If you injure a finger or injure a body part acutely and there's swelling, ice in the first 24 hours is the thing to do and is beneficial. You get a few days down the road from that acute injury, the ice isn't useful anymore. In terms of just like delayed onset muscle soreness, just general muscle tightness or soreness after a workout or the day after a workout, there are companies that try to market you, come get dipped in this cryotherapy tank to help. It's not useful. It's not helpful in those situations. And actually, potentially, using ice for just regular exercise soreness might be counterproductive, because the inflammation that occurs from a typical workout is something that you want. It's part of the signaling that gets your body to adapt from the workout. And so I think I talked about this a couple of episodes ago, using ice, or for that matter, ibuprofen taken chronically for just, muscle pain from climbing or working out. Those types of things on a regular basis are counterproductive because they blunt the signal for adaptation, the very signal that you want, that you are seeking when you are training and climbing. And so every now and then to consume a couple ibuprofen, there's a morning you wake up and you really ache, or something like that, or an injury, or ice in those same two situations, an acute injury. No problem. Probably not a bad thing to do, but to do it chronically would be counterproductive. Okay, next up, Anthony. Thanks for putting these out. Just got back from the New River Gorge, and I noticed my endurance plan did not get my fitness where it needed to be to climb 512s, he says here. How do you adjust before the next trip? Cheers. Wow, that's really hard to say because it depends on the route. The New River Gorge tends to be like, a section of hard climbing, then maybe a ledge and a stance and a rest. And so it can be more like a repeated sprint exercise where you have multiple cruxes with some decent rests in between. And so, one thing to work on is just climbing more quickly during those hard sections of the route, and then making the most of the recovery period. You're able to make the most of the strength you possess and the strength endurance that you possess. Long-term, building your aerobic energy system through like threshold training and doing a lot of route climbing is beneficial, but those are longer term adaptations. In terms of a short-term adaptation that maybe you could spin up in a few weeks would be relating to the anaerobic lactic energy system and the buffering that occurs in the muscles, the bloodstream, the lactate transporters in the cell that help you deal with the acidosis and high lactate loads of very pumpy climbing. And so if you did some bouldering 4x4s at the climbing gym, where you do if you ever played soccer or football, where you did sprint intervals, where you would sprint 50 yards, then rest for 10 or 20 seconds, and then sprint 50 yards and rest 10 or 20 seconds, and you do a few of those, it is rigorous and grueling, but it gets you these adaptations that really benefit you in terms of short-term power endurance, like you would need at the New River Gorge or any pumpy route climbing area. And those adaptations you can spin up in even just a few sessions to a few weeks. And so you want to kind of mimic those sprint intervals at the gym. And the way to do it is on a bouldering wall. And you don't want to be bouldering at your limit. You want to be bouldering well below your limit. Let's say your bouldering limit is V8. Well, then I would probably select V3, V4 kind of routes. Pick out a V4 and do it 4 times in a row, the exact same boulder route, 4 times in a row, with just a 30-second rest in between. So it might take you 30 or 40 seconds to climb the boulder problem, jump off, chalk up, shake out, rest for 30 or 40 seconds, and then do it again. And do that 4 times in a row. And that'll get you out of breath. It'll get you fatigued in a way, kind of like climbing those harder routes you mentioned. Rest 5 minutes, at most 10 minutes, and do it again. Pick out a different boulder to keep it interesting, a V3, a V4. It should be hard enough to make you work, but not so hard that you're falling off of it, because you want to be able to do it 4 times in a row with just a brief recovery. And so do that 4 times, hence the 4x4 protocol, which is something I've written about and a lot of coaches have written about. And you do that twice a week as part of your training program, and that will get you some adaptations that might make a difference in your next trip, let's say later this fall. Give that a try. Okay, Vade says, I have a wrist flexor tendinosis. Do you have to go to frequency range rehab? I'm doing 3 sets of 15 reps every 48 to 72 hours. I'm also using your supercharged collagen powder. I've had this condition for almost 2 years. Yeah, well, tendinosis implies failed healing, and you use the correct term there. A lot of people say tendinitis, but tendinitis is an acute inflammation that comes on quickly and is a more short-term condition. When you get these elbow or wrist, these chronic injuries of connective tissue, of tendons, or the muscular tendon junction, that's tendinosis, which indicates failed healing. And to be completely honest, those are the toughest injuries to heal when you've had them for 6 months or a year or 2 years, as you've mentioned. And I've worked with a lot of climbers and ninja warriors who have that condition in their elbows. Medial or lateral epicondylitis or tendinosis is the common ailment. They're buggers to get rid of. Very, very difficult. And for some athletes, it just comes down to managing the condition, trying to not provoke it to get worse, and trying to just climb through it in a state that you can still climb at a fairly high level and enjoy climbing, but maybe not train and climb at your limit, because that would provoke it. And so, I'm afraid to give any specific advice for you here. Sounds like you've seen a doctor probably about the condition, and not even quite sure where that injury is on you. You mentioned wrist, but yet more commonly the injury is down in the elbow. And there are some surgical procedures that have worked, like Tenix or shockwave, extracorporeal shockwave therapy, have shown some success. Interventions like PRP treatment have been shown to be not helpful with these conditions. So you don't want to spend your money on that. The collagen powder, I'm not going to say is a fix, but it can certainly help the cause, help provide the building blocks for healing, especially when coupled with your rehab. And it sounds like you have a rehab plan set up. So I don't know that I can add anything really useful there. I'm sorry to say, Vade. I'm not a physician, so I don't want to say anything that might conflict with the PT or physician that you've been saying. Okay, next up, Eric, in your book, the part on the deadlift protocol for climbers, how often do I need to change the weight? Cheers from Mexico. Well, perhaps never once you get really into it. And here's why. You're not looking to become a powerlifter where your weights just increment up year over year to some crazy numbers, 3 times body weight. In fact, if you even approach 2 times body weight on your deadlift, more than enough. I would say even, for most climbers, if you would progress to 1.5 times body weight on your deadlift, perfect. That's great. And you don't even have to really go there, to be honest. These days, I tend to, deadlift at about my body weight, around 160 pounds, give or take. Though I could probably do a 1 rep max at 220 or something. There's just no reward for that. The one time 5 years ago, I did kind of increment up my deadlifting. I ended up getting a bit of an injury that was totally unnecessary. And at my age, I don't need any injuries to take me out of the game for a period of time. So, I often joke on my podcasts, if you've listened to them, that the number one rule of Eric's Train Club, not Fight Club, but Train Club, is don't get injured training. And so with deadlifting, that means make sure you know how to deadlift properly, that you're doing it with good form. And 2 is don't go down to this rabbit hole of becoming enamored of gains and getting your weights to go heavier and heavier. If you've built up to being able to do 5 reps at body weight, great. That's probably enough. If you can build up to doing 3 to 5 reps at 1.5 times body weight, enough. You don't need to go any higher than that. And just deadlifting twice a week, the protocol that I have in the Training for Climbing book that you mentioned and that I use is I do a warm-up set of deadlift. I do a generalized warm-up first. I go jogging or do some rowing or something to get my body warmed up. And then I do a warm-up set of deadlift, 6 reps. I typically use around 120 pounds, so maybe around 70% of your training weight. Do that warm-up set, and then just 2 or 3 more sets of at your training weight, which again, for me, on any given day, it might be 155, 160, 165, and I'll do 2 or 3 sets of 5 reps, and that's it. And again, you might over time be able to, as you get stronger, add a little bit of weight to that, but just don't get carried away. There's no value in getting crazy deadlift numbers. It might be good for your ego, and it is kind of fun, admittedly, but you got to keep your eye on the ball, and the ball is becoming a better climber, and the value that there is for strengthening the posterior chain and all of your core muscles deadlifting is quite high. But again, you're a climber, you're not a power lifter, deadlifter, and you want to do nothing that puts on muscle mass. If you are lifting and you're putting on muscle mass, especially below the waist muscle mass, change your protocol. You do not want to add weight. I don't care if there are coaches who say don't worry about it. Worry about it. If you are into hard bouldering or sport climbing, anything that's past vertical where more weight is on your fingers than is on your feet, you don't want to put mass on in your lower body. Look at the people climbing the hardest, and they are built like V's. They're really quite strong and ripped in their upper body, but their lower body is not gigantic. So if you want to take your climbing for many years to a higher and higher level, building a little bit of bulk in the upper body, not necessarily a bad thing in the right places, but adding weight in the lower body because of a lifting protocol, big mistake. Okay. Where are we here? Let's see. Okay. Brian. If I only have 2 or 3 days a week to train and climb, what training and climbing exercises should I focus on with the goal of getting from 5'11" to 5'12" in 12 months? Well, first of all, climbing, 3 days a week, whether it's bouldering, route climbing. You mentioned route grades, so you want to try to route climb at least 2 days a week, because that is just, the movement skills, developing the economy of movement, learning how to rest, learning how to attack a route where you climb faster when the holds are small and the moves are hard, and you slow down when the holds are big and you can kind of recover. Those are things you can only learn by climbing a lot. So that's priority in terms of actual training, developing your pull muscle strength, weighted pull-ups, some hangboard training a couple days a week. Maybe you could even do a little bit of supplemental hangboard training at home when you aren't at the gym. You don't have to do a crazy amount of hangboard training, but being able to take your grip strength to the next level is helpful. And so you can put together a really good program that will absolutely get you from 11 to 12 with what you mentioned there, 2 or 3 days a week. You can do it. It might help to engage a coach, Brian, that can help dial in a specific program of all the things I mentioned, including core training, I should add. I can't do that here for you, unfortunately. I do, especially this winter, I do some training consults where I do a 1-hour Zoom consult where I help work with a climber to dial in a very personalized program. If anybody here is interested in that, that's something we could talk about. You could reach out to me via email, and I could meet with you via Zoom for an hour and really get down into the details with your goals and your training. Greg, good to see you back here. He says he's been transitioning to one-arm hangs using the 753 protocol that's in my training for climbing book. My fingers are strong enough, but my shoulders can't hold the load longer than 5 or 6 seconds. Any tips, more counterweight, he asks. And the answer is yes, more counterweight to help build those stabilizer muscles. And, that is why it is better for most people to train with 2 arms, is that it's just a lot more stable and safe on your shoulders to stay in proper engaged form. You don't want to hangboard with your shoulders up near your ears. You will wreck your shoulders if you do that chronically, frequently. And so 2-handed training, it's easier to keep your shoulders down in a safe position and train with added weight. But at some point, the added weight gets to be so high that, yes, you do need to transition, Greg, to one-arm training. But you can do 5-second hangs. I think 5-second hangs, you could do a 5:55 protocol instead of a 7:53 protocol. And that's probably what I would recommend you do, though using the counterweight system will help you develop the strength of the supporting muscle group, along with, all the, doing the rotator cuff muscle training and the Ys and Is and Ts that I mentioned earlier. All those things long-term, a long-term commitment, you will spin that up and you'll eventually be able to do a 7-second hang or a 10-second hang with one arm. But it'll take some time to get there. And again, the form has to be there. You want to be safe. Number one rule of Eric's Training Club is don't get injured training. So, be smart. Christopher says, in case you didn't already, could you please explain the main symptoms of wrist flexor tendinosis? Might be very relevant to my issue the last 5 months. Well, again, that previous question on the wrist flexor tendinosis, that's a term I'm not so familiar with. I'm not sure. I mean, it mentions wrist. So you think of this area, which is where carpal tunnel syndrome occurs. Though the wrist flexors are the muscles of your forearms, the same muscles that flex your fingers. And so maybe that's just another way of saying medial epicondylitis. And your medial epicondyle is that bone right here where many of the finger flexor muscles originate. And hence, so when you get pain on the tendon right near the bone or at the connection to the bone, that's that classical climber's elbow, golfer's elbow. It goes by both of those names because of climbers and golfers getting that condition. Though, you can get it from doing labor, from doing activities with your wrists. And so again, if you're talking medial epicondylitis or tendinosis, if it's long-term, if it's a condition that's gone on for many months or even years, then it's tendinosis, which indicates there's failed healing of the connective tissues. Again, I mentioned earlier, that's a bugger of an injury to work through. If it's a fresh new injury, you might be able to nip it in the bud so that it doesn't go forward and become chronic. But if it is chronic, it's difficult to work through. And rewind the video to my earlier comments. Philip says, how often do you recommend to assess your training for climbing? Assess as in gather data and do tests like grip strength testing and things like that. I think at most once a season or once a training cycle, if you do a 10-week training cycle or block, between trips or during the winter, you might test at the beginning and test at the end and determine what you got out of it. I know with all these grip force testers and protocols and videos out there are people that go and collect data every day or every week. And I think it's just stupid because there's so much noise in the data, how much of a warm up you got, how recovered you are from your previous workout. There are so many variables. Friction, if it's a hot day versus a cold day, if you test on a slippery hold versus a more coarse hold, there are so many things that affect the data that you collect when it comes to grip force testing that if you're testing it, on a weekly basis, you just get a lot of noise. And so if you can do a really high quality test once every few months, twice a year, and when I say high quality test, make sure you've had 2 rest days, make sure you have a very thorough warm up, and every time you test, make that repeatable. Same time of day, that's a big one. If you test yourself in the evening versus the morning, you're going to be stronger in the evening. So you want to control the conditions of the testing, of the assessment, and repeat that perfectly. And to do that, it can only be something you do every now and then. It can't be something you do every week. Oh, this is a follow-up from Hamaz. The Lewis hunting reaction or hunting response is a process of alternating vasoconstriction and dilation to this. Okay, so this is where you go from warm to cold, back and forth. You do the ice bath and stuff. And yeah, I mean, there is some benefit to that. I haven't read the research. I mean, I know anecdotally, I've not used it really. I mean, I use a sauna. And I do occasionally use ice, but I don't use that contrast. But I think there is potentially some benefit in terms of heat shock proteins, getting some beneficial adaptations that it could be almost a training protocol to do those contrast type things. I think for rehab and therapy, there is perhaps some value. But again, I haven't reviewed the research, so I can't make a big statement on it. Okay, and I do need to wrap things up here in the next few minutes here, so let me answer 2 more questions, and then I'm sorry, but I'll probably have to hold off on the rest, unless I can really move quickly here. Luca says, hey, Eric, reading your training for climbing book, and I've really enjoyed it. Could you list some mobility exercises to start my warm-up to perform after 25 minutes of running? Yeah, I love that you're from Italy. That's cool. And I love that you do some running before you do your training. That's great. It shouldn't be exhaustive running, but it does give you a good cardiovascular warm-up. And if you can then have kind of a cool down period after you're running where you do some mobility work. Band work is good. The run does a great job of just kind of warming up your lower body joints, and I guess even your shoulders. You're moving your arms, and so you probably come out of that run quite warmed up. And to do some climbing specific type things, with some elastic bands, some internal and external rotation. You don't want to do excessive stretching of your shoulders, obviously, though you could do a little bit of lower body stretching after you're done with your run. But really, just getting on the climbing wall and slowly ramping up your climbing gives you a good dynamic stretch. I think the run really accomplishes a lot of what you need to do before a workout. Now, for someone who doesn't run, and a lot of climbers don't have the time or desire to run before they do a climbing workout, if you're not doing some type of cardiovascular activity for a time before you climb, then I think there is absolutely more value in doing some dynamic exercise warm-ups. You could do a few pull-ups and push-ups and dips and things that engage the muscles, get the blood flowing, get the joints and connective tissues lubricated. Stay away from excessive static stretching, of course, pre-workout, though you could do a little bit of that at the end of the workout or in the evening. Onward, Philip is back with another question. General hangboard training, is it necessary to train other grip types than half and 3-finger drag? I think it really depends. For people new to hangboard training, I think you want to just kind of train those two main grip positions, kind of that half crimp and then an open hand or drag position. And do your weighted hangs with that, do your repeaters with that. And then all your other finger training is kind of on the wall, as you're climbing. Now, for more advanced climbers, I do think expanding your hangboard training to 2-finger pockets, even to monos, to 1-finger pockets, doing some pinch training. I prefer doing pinch training standing, not on a hangboard. So, broadening out, making your training more comprehensive as you become more advanced. Yes, you do need to go there, which takes more of a time commitment. The way a lot of pros do it, the way we do it here, is have a separate workout that is just kind of focused on warming up and then training grip strength, kind of doing some complex training where there's a little bit of campus board coupled in with the hangboard training. And that's a workout. With the warm up and everything, it's a 1 hour to 90-minute workout where we haven't even put on our climbing shoes. Now, that's one workout in a day that we're going to do 2 workouts. The second workout later in the day is going to be a climbing workout of some type. And so again, that's kind of a more advanced 2-a-day hangboard protocol. More advanced climbers need to do more training. And they also need to be more aware and focused on their recovery and their rest and their nutrition, to support recovery from a more high volume training load. But for a more beginner climber, somebody just getting into hangboard training, train those 2 primary grips. That's it. Okay, AJ, what's a good book recommendation besides your own for personal growth and philosophy? Thanks for everything, from Boulder, Colorado. Well, yeah, I could come up with a long list because I've read a lot of books over the years that have influenced me. When it comes to training, there are a few really good training books out there in addition to mine. Training for Climbing is my best-selling book. I think maybe my most intense and rich book for a more advanced, experienced climber is Maximum Climbing, because it is more cognitive and philosophical, and it involves becoming a master at climber. It really outlines what's involved in doing that, but it's not a beginner's book. But in terms of non-climbing books, well, Boulder, Colorado's own Jim Collins, who's a climber, best-selling author, business consultant, wrote an incredible book, I don't know, 20 years ago now, called Good to Great. And although it's a business book, it transcends business, and it would be a great read or audio book to listen to, because it kind of, is about pursuing excellence, moving from being good at something to being great at something. And again, it's written more from the context of a business person or entrepreneur, but it can apply, many of the traits are obviously transferable to athletics as well. And oh boy, I don't know. I recently listened to the audiobook of the Phil Knight biography, which the name of the book slips me, but I found that very interesting. Somebody who started a business from scratch and turned it into this, iconic business against all odds. And not without a little controversy, but it's an impressive success story. Boy, I'd probably have to circle back to that and look at my bookshelf and try to pick out of hundreds of books a few that have been most impactful to me. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, AJ. It's not the best of answers, but ping me again and I'll try to feed you some ideas. Okay, I'm really running late here, and I got a appointment at 1:30 I need to scoot off to here. But I do want to address this one. Tom says, having two boys, how do you manage to stay psyched, get out? Did you plan to get your kids into climbing, or did they get into it naturally? And Tom adds on, big fan of yours and love your media. So I appreciate that, Tom. And the training for climbing, the media that I generate, the books I've written, it's a labor of love. I didn't get into it really as a career, but it turned into a career over time that has really led to Physivantage kind of as my capstone project that I'm passionate about and really believe in as being game-changing and really revolutionary for climbers to have climbing-specific nutrition. But to answer your question, my boys got into climbing organically. I mean, my wife and I climbed for many years before having kids. When we had the kids, having a home climbing wall that my wife and I trained on when the kids were toddlers, age 2, 3, 4, 5, they would get up and just play around. That's all it was. We didn't push them, do anything. When they got to be 5 or 6, we would take them on day climbing trips. A lot of those day climbing trips ended early because, the kids just, you're out at the cliff for a few hours and they kind of hit the wall and the kids aren't having fun. And, I am against the parents who have the kids there against their will, like as prisoners. And so the kids would entertain themselves and have fun at the cliff, and they would get on the rope and swing around at age 4 or 5. Not really climb that much. And then when they would get tired of being there, we would call it a day and go home. And so we kept the kids as our priority, keeping them happy, keeping it fun for the kids. And so expose them to climbing, the climbing gym, at your home gym, at half days at the crag. And with that fun exposure, hopefully they'll learn to love it. And as they show interest in climbing, which our kids grew, age 6, they would want to start to top rope routes. So they kind of understood the rules of the game, that the goal wasn't to swing in the rope, but to not weight the rope and actually climb to the top of the route. And when they learned the rules of the game, then they, of course, got addicted. And our kids played other sports, and so they became well-rounded athletes. But they really did become enamored of climbing. They both did their first sport climbing leads with the bolts really close together and helmets on at age 7. And from there, they were off to the races. And believe it or not, by age 10, they were both climbing harder than me, because that's how kid climbers are. If they have a good coach are let's say just average in terms of genetics, you can become really good at climbing because it's a skill sport, and the kids don't weigh anything, and so they both climbed 514 at age, I think Cameron at age 11 and John at age 10 and a half. At the time, John was the youngest person on planet Earth to climb 514A, but we didn't set out to make them super climbers. That was not the goal. The goal was to have them enjoy climbing, climb as a family. We would go out and do traditional climbing like Devil's Tower or climb at the Schwangunks, and then we would go to sport crags and they would learn to push themselves at their limit. And the boys stay fully today in love with climbing, which is great. I hope they'll continue to be climbers for life. They both are climbing at a super high level. Cameron did his first 515A this year. I think maybe the youngest American male to climb 515A, though I might be wrong about that. He did it at age 20. My younger son, John, climbed a couple of 14Cs at age 18, and he's on his way, if he wants to, if he stays motivated, to follow in the footsteps of his brother. So that's cool for me to see them fall in love with the sport and to do well in the sport. But I've always impressed upon them, it's about experience first. And when climbing stops being fun, then it's time to take some time off and do something else. And that's a message I think anybody can take to heart, is if climbing begins to feel like a job, or the training isn't fun, or the travel becomes a burden, then maybe it's time to take a season off, or at least a few weeks off, and do something else. And, if climbing's in your blood, you'll circle back to it and be a climber for life like this old guy is. And so that's a good place for me to leave it. I've been rambling here for an hour. I hope you really enjoyed it. If I didn't get to your question, well, then please revisit or type it in again 2 weeks from now, and I will be back. I promise. I'm not sure what the date would be on that. It would be 2 weeks from today. I guess that would be November 8th at noon Eastern. We can convene again with coffee here at the Training Cafe. Until then, train smart, climb hard, and of course, always have fun.